Hi, everybody. This is Paul Garrard for the American Dental Education Association. As you prepare to enter dental school, one of the most important questions you're going to have is how are you going to pay for your dental school education? In this short module, we take a look at 10 very important common sense questions that every incoming dental school student should ask. Perhaps the most obvious one, what is the cost of attendance? What is it going to cost me to go to dental school? This is commonly referred to as the COA, cost of attendance, or the financial aid budget. This number should be available on your dental school's website or from a financial aid office. So if you can't find it online, contact the financial aid office. The cost of attendance includes the best guesstimate of what it's going to cost you for 1 year at dental school, and it includes things like tuition and fees, an allowance for books and supplies and transportation, personal and miscellaneous expenses, and certainly room and board. This number is extremely important because the cost of attendance represents the most financial aid you can get from all sources in 1 year. Now, the cost of attendance may change slightly from year to year if there are changes in tuition, and also depending on how long you are enrolled for a particular year of dental school. In addition to looking at the cost of attendance each year, it's very important as you come into dental school to look at what it will cost you over the entire 4 years of the program. So as you're making your plans, don't just look at the cost of attendance the first year. You need to be thinking about what's it going to cost me over the course of 4 years. So the next obvious question, how can you control your expenses? Well, in the cost of attendance that we just looked at, remember that there's some things you have no control over, such as tuition and fees and any direct expenses the dental school may charge you. But there are some things that you do have control over, your room and board, living expenses, personal, transportation, etc. Look in the cost of attendance, pull those numbers out, those things you have some control over, divide that number by the number of months you're enrolled in your program each year, and that's your monthly living allowance, and see if you can come in under that monthly living allowance. We're going to talk about this again in an upcoming slide. But the main thing is look at those things in your cost of attendance, your budget that you have some control over, and focus on those, and don't obsess about the things you have no control over, such as tuition and fees. Now, once you know what your cost of attendance is and you've got a pretty good idea about what it's going to cost you your first year of dental school, and you've got a pretty good idea about how much money you're actually going to need your first year, the next question is going to be, well, what kind of financial aid can you get to help you meet those costs? We're going to talk about this again in a future slide, but one of the most important relationships you'll have is with the financial aid office. They are your best source of information on financial aid. So be sure that you contact them as soon as possible to find out what kind of financial aid you can get as a dental school student. In general, guys, there are two types of financial aid. Gift assistance, which includes grants and scholarships. These are funds that do not have to be repaid. They can be awarded based on financial need, on merit, or a combination of those. Your financial aid office will know if those funds are available and how to apply for them. And then the second type of assistance is student loans, which we'll talk more about in this short presentation. You can expect to fill out what's called the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA. That's a requirement to get financial aid at dental schools. Those of you who have had financial aid before should be familiar with the FAFSA. Now, we just mentioned that one of the types of financial aid available for dental students is obviously student loans. And so you know, about 80% of dental school students borrow some kind of student loans to help them pay for dental school. In general, there are three categories of student loans. Federal direct loans that come directly from the government. This would be the direct unsub and the direct plus, also known as grad plus. Some schools have what are called campus-based loans. These are loans available directly from the school. Your financial aid office will know if those are available. And then there are some borrowers, including international students, who may need to take out private loans. But in general, the majority of dental school graduates have federal student loans in their student loan portfolio. We'd encourage you to take a look at the Money Matters section of the Go Dental website, where there is detailed information on the different kinds of student loans for dental school. And you can always talk to your financial aid office about the differences in federal, campus-based, and private loans. So if you're part of that roughly 80% who is going to need to borrow to pay for your dental school education, how can you be sure that you're not borrowing more than you really need? Well, we go back to something we've already said. Look at your cost of attendance number and pull out of that those items you have some control over: room and board, transportation, personal, miscellaneous expenses, etc. Divide that number by the number of months you are enrolled your first year, and that's your monthly living allowance. See if you can beat that and get in under that. And if that's the case, don't borrow the full cost of attendance, even though you can. Simple example. If your budget's $90,000 and you think you can get in at $80,000, you've got to have enough to pay tuition and fees and direct expenses from the school. But if you can get by on 80,000, don't borrow the full 90, start at 80, and if you need more funds later on, you can go borrow those with the financial aid office. Talk to them about increasing the amount that you're borrowing up to the total cost of attendance. One advantage of that is that, remember, interest accrues on your loans when the funds are dispersed. So if you can delay some of the funds being dispersed until later, that's going to delay the interest accrual and save you some funds in repayment. The second approach, though, is if you're really not sure how much you're going to need, you can borrow the full cost of attendance. And once you get settled into your budget, perhaps your second or third month in dental school, if you don't need all those funds, talk to the financial aid office about returning those. So how much debt can you expect to have if you do have to borrow for dental school? The most recently reported debt for indebted borrowers in the class of 2023 was $296,500. Note that that includes any pre-dental school debt that borrowers had coming in, perhaps from college and or a post-bac program. The average dental school debt is about $280,700. Again, these are from indebted borrowers in the class of 2023. Now, what do you do if you are an international student looking for financial aid? Well, guys, the first point of contact is always the financial aid office. Find out from them if there are any funds designated or set aside specifically for international students, and if so, are those funds also available in subsequent years? Remember, you don't just want to look at funding for year one, you want to be sure you've got financial aid to cover the entire duration of your dental school education, your 4 years. Now, you're probably aware that federal financial aid is only available for U.S. citizens and permanent residents. If you go to the Go Dental site and look under Money Matters, you'll see a section specifically for international students, and you'll see a reference that you may be able to borrow a private loan if you can get a creditworthy cosigner who is a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. But the main point of contact, again, is going to be the financial aid office to see if there are funds set aside for international students. So how do dental school graduates actually handle their student loan debt? Well, fortunately, there are lots of options for you. In terms of federal loans, you can either use a time-driven repayment plan where the monthly payments are based solely on how much you owe at repayment spread out over a 10-year period of time or a 25-year period of time, or you can use what's called an income-driven repayment plan. And guys, this is where your monthly loan payments aren't based on how much debt you have, they are based on what your income is. And that's very helpful to someone who has high debt compared to their income. There are also loan repayment assistance programs. These are programs like the National Health Service Corps and the military, where in exchange for service, they give you funding to help pay down your student loan debt. And there are also programs like the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program that will forgive your debt after 10 years if you work in the nonprofit sector. So lots of different ways to handle your debt. So you know, almost 50% of recent dental school graduates indicate that their initial strategy is going to be aggressive and try to get their debt paid off in 10 years or less. Now, if you are going to have to borrow for dental school, and again, about 80% of you likely will, there's some basic things that you should know about your student loans and how they work. And guys, a lot of this information is covered in more detail in the Money Matters section of the Go Dental site we keep referring you to. But some basic things. First of all, in all likelihood, your student loans will come due 6 months after you graduate from dental school. That's certainly the case with the federal loans, Direct Unsub and Direct Plus, also known as Grad Plus. Also remember that the amount you owe at repayment in all likelihood is going to be higher than the amount you originally borrowed. And that's because the loans you're taking out in almost all cases are unsubsidized. That simply means interest starts to build or accrue as soon as the loan is dispersed. So for example, if you borrowed $300,000 for dental school over the course of your 4 years, that could easily be $330,000 or higher depending on the interest rates on your student loans. Speaking of interest rates, they are fixed on federal loans, but they change every July 1 on new loans. It's also very important for you to know who you're working with in repayment. In the promissory note that you sign, for example, the master promissory note you'll sign for your federal student loans, your lender will be listed, and your lender for federal student loans is actually the federal government. But they contract with third-party servicers to work with you in repayment. So it's extremely important that you know who your loan servicer is, because again, those are the folks who are going to be notifying you about your borrowing and your repayment options after you graduate. When you have a loan approved, you should get what is called a disclosure statement, and it is extremely important that you keep this document because it details what you borrowed, what your options are, the interest rate, the repayment term, when the loans come due, etc. So again, a lot of this information is covered in the Money Matters section of Go Dental. These are some basic things that everybody should know about their student loans. Now, we've thrown a lot at you in this short module on paying for dental school, and perhaps we end with one of the most obvious questions. Where can you go for help if you have more questions? We've mentioned this before, but the #1 point of contact is always the financial aid office when you have questions about paying for dental school. Please note that there are some dental schools where there is a designated person or persons actually housed in the dental school who helps you with financial aid, but in some cases, and probably in most cases, financial aid for dental students is handled in a main campus financial aid office. So be sure you know who your designated person or persons are to help you with financial aid and where they're located, because you're going to have a long-term relationship with them over the course of your 4 years, especially if you need financial aid over that entire duration of time. Don't forget that on the Money Matters site, we keep information updated, and also in the financial resources section of the ADEA website, there's also information that may help you. Thanks so much for watching and listening to this module on paying for dental school. Please enjoy the Go Dental virtual fair, and remember that responsible borrowing leads to responsible repayment.